So without further ado, let's get started. So Unit 1 test, we've got 5 sections covered in there. It's a 40-minute test. It's not going to take a whole block. So these are our main topics, domain and range, function notation. We have equations of lines, average rate of change, finding inverses and linear regressions, system of equations in 3 variables, everybody's favorite, and function transformations. If you're in Miss Driscoll's class who's taking it tomorrow, I know function transformations are not on your test. So don't fret if I'm going over something that you haven't seen. Everybody else, it will be on at Miss Driscoll's. You guys will test at a later date. One advice I would give you guys, and this might be different from other math classes you've had, you should have been given by your teacher a set of learning targets on your kind of course outline. This is just a zoomed in picture of mine. These learning targets right down here, you can go through and sort of check off as you go. So you can say, do I understand this? Do I understand that? So use that as a study tool for you. Make sure that you understand those. Also use your study guide that your teacher gave you. And if you do that, this should be a pretty fair test. So we're going to get started with basics. We're going to start with domain and range, and we're just going to go through briefly each topic. Again, at any time, shoot me questions. Totally fine. So starting with domain and range, remember domain is your set of all your x values. Range is the set of all your y values. The one big thing that I've seen mixed up, especially in my classes, is the idea of distinguishing between an interval and a list. So when you make a list of domain items, you are going to use a curly bracket or a brace, and you're just going to list them. So whatever those set members are, you're just going to list them. But whenever I do a list, I'm using those curly brackets. If I'm doing an interval, I'm either using a bracket or parentheses or a combo of them. Now, how do I tell the difference between those? Well, here's what I always think about. If I have a function like this, where I have an open endpoint on one side and a closed endpoint on the other. Remember at the closed endpoint that it can be equal to. So I think about an equal sign, and if I connect those, that makes a bracket. So a bracket is the can be equal to part, okay? When I think about the open endpoint, I almost think about taking that open endpoint and just erasing half of it. Kind of looks like a parentheses, right? So a bracket is when it can equal, a parentheses is when it cannot equal, and that's a good way to keep those straight. So let's just take a look at a couple examples. Again, this isn't a particularly difficult topic. It should be review, but just to make sure we're okay on this. So first one, what is the domain of the relation shown? So domain, you should be thinking all your x's or your input values. So I'm just going to go through and pick my x values. So any first coordinate in a point like that is an x value. So I want that whole list. So I should have my lowest value 0, and then I have 1, and then I have 4. So I want this set. Notice it's a list, so it uses those curly brackets. All right, let's use a different notation that sometimes we're not as familiar with. The graph of radical x plus 4 is shown. What is the domain? So let's look at the graph and sort of analyze this. Domain is my x value, so I'm going to look from left to right. I see that my smallest x value is right here, and it's a closed circle there. So that is at -4. And thinking about brackets and parentheses, this would be a bracket. As I go to the right, there is no biggest value. That arrow, remember, means it continues on forever. So that would go towards infinity. We cannot equal infinity because it is not a number. So that would have to be a parentheses. In interval notation, that would be your answer. But let's look at the set notation here. So what this is saying is all x values such that whatever happens after it is true. So I'm looking for which of these 4 is equivalent to my interval notation there. Now notice we said it can equal -4, and then it goes up from there. So I'm going to choose choice 4, which is x is every value greater than or equal to -4. All right, last one of these, which value is in the domain but not in the range? So this one requires you to find both and then go from there. So in the domain, well, let's look at my domain first. So my domain 1, 2, 3, 4. So that starts at -4. It ends at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Ends at 9. So my domain here is from -4 to 9. Brackets in both places because we have closed circles, right? Closed endpoints. Now let's look at our range. So our range, we're going to go from bottom to top instead of left to right. So my lowest y value is right here. That's at -2. My highest y value is up there, and that's at 4. So my range is from -2 to 4. And again, I don't see any open endpoints, so I'm going to leave those with brackets. So I want to know what value is in this, but not in the range. So any value between -2 and 4 is going to be in my range. So 0, 2, and 3 are all there, so it must be answer choice 4. Okay, if you have questions on those, send them along. I'm going to move on to the next topic, but we can always come back. All right, next one, talking about function notation, and I threw in an inverse in here just to get you thinking a little bit more about those. So, the thing to remember about function notation is this. We know that y equals f of x. So the thing that you should remember is this value in the parentheses, when you just have f of x, is your input, or your x value, right? And then the actual value of f of x is your y value. So that's really the question I ask myself. So this function pictured is f of x. It's a linear equation or linear function, -2x plus 2. And the first thing it asks me to do is to find f of 2. Well, let's think about this. Find f of 2, this means that that is my x value. Excuse me. So what it's saying is I have a coordinate at 2, something, and I want to know what that something is. So I'm going to look at when x is 2, which is right here, and I'm going to go down on my graph to that point. That point is 2, -2, so here f of 2 equals -2. That's my final answer. All right, let's look at it going the other way. So the other way says find x such that f of x equals 0. Remember, f of x is really y. So what this is saying is you have a point where I don't know x, but I know that y is 0. So it's saying what x value does that happen at? Well, look at where y is 0. If I look at that, that would be right here, right, where it's 0 on my y-axis. And so x there must equal 1. Now, one thing I saw on my quizzes was a lot of people here would write f of 1 equals 0, and that's a true statement, but you didn't answer the question. The question says, what is the x value? So I really only care about that value right there. So make sure you're stating that in your answer. All right, last thing with function notation, and again, send questions as you have them. F inverse of 2. So the big thing to remember, and we'll do a little more with inverses in a little bit, but the thing to remember here is that inverses switch your x and y. So if I'm asking you for f inverse, normally this would be x, which means right now, that puppy is y, right? So what this is saying is f of what x value equals 2. It's switched your x and y. So I'm going to look at my graph, and I'm going to say, well, where do I have a y value of 2? And that would be anywhere along that line, right? Which is right here. And think about what is your x coordinate there. So f inverse of 2 equals 0. And again, we'll do some more with inverses, but this is just playing around with function notation a little bit. Okay, moving on to another sort of application of function notation. So, Copacabana Beach in Rio de Janeiro is one of the most popular beaches in the world. P of t models the number of people at the beach. P of t is the number of people at the beach. T hours past midnight. Okay? So when I see P of 10 equals n, here's what I need to analyze. It was P of t, right? Which means that 10 is t here. So I already see that 10 is t. I know t is hours past midnight. So what I can tell myself here is that this means 10 hours past midnight. That's my input value, right? And I'm being very specific here. Oh, can you tell I used to teach geo? I wrote midpoint. Midnight. What does P of t and this n thing mean? So P of t is the number of people. P of 10 equals n. So 10 hours past midnight, there are N people on the beach. So again, think about what your input is. Think about what your output is. 10 is your input, so it's hours. N is your output, so it's people on the beach. Okay, now same idea. What does the statement P of T equals 3,500 mean? So what this means, again, think about your input there being hours. So after T hours, output is 3,500. There are 3,500 people on the beach. Okay. So that was a very brief review of 1-1. We're going to move into 1-2. But again, if you have questions, send them my way, okay? So 1-2 was all about writing equations of lines. I expect that you know the equation for slope, change in y over change in x. I expect that you know point slope form, which is this, where you use a point, x1, y1, and a slope m. And I expect you to know slope intercept form, which is that. I also expect that you can tell the difference. So if I ask you for it in one form over the other, I expect that you can give me those, okay? So let's chat about these. So find the equation of a line with a slope of -1 passing through -4, 6. So I'm going to do this in both forms, and we'll specify which is which. So equation of a line with a slope of -1. I know that's my m. Passes through -4, 6. So this is x1, y1. There's no x2, y2, but that's okay. So I'm going to use point slope form first, which is y minus y1 equals m x minus x1. So that's plus 4 minus -4. Now, I have this, right? This is point slope form. And if I asked you for that, I would expect that you stop there. If you go beyond that, you've done too much, and that shows me that you didn't quite understand the forms. So make sure you stop where appropriate. Let's say I ask for it in slope intercept form. So I need to solve for y. So I'm going to do that by distributing out the -1. So y minus 6 equals -x minus 4. And then I'm going to solve for y. So I'm going to add 6 to both sides. So y equals -6 plus 2. So that would be slope intercept. This would be point slope. Good. All right. Next one. Find the equation of a line passing through 4, -8 and -2, 6. So I am not given an m here, but I am given points. So this is x1, y1. This is x2, y2. And I need the slope for either form, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find the slope, which I know is my change in y, 6 minus -8 over -2 minus 4. So that would be 14 over -6. Yep, equals 7 over -3, or -7/3. So that's my slope. Now, to get it into point slope form, I'm going to do y minus whatever my y value is. It doesn't matter. You can pick either point. -8, let's say, equals -7/3 times x minus 4. And again, that would be in point slope form. To get it into slope intercept form, you would distribute out the -7/3 and then solve for y. So hopefully that's review from Algebra 1 and Geo. Last thing on 1-2 was talking about average rate of change. So let's look at that really quick. Remember that average rate of change is just a fancy way to say slope. And to get slope, you need points. So that's the first thing that I would say. So the formula that you would see for average rate of change is f of b minus f of a over b minus a. Well, this is just a fancy way to say y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. It's just written in function notation, right? Remember that f of x is the same as y. So that's really all we're doing here. So when I actually calculate, that's where I'm going. So we're going to do two, one from an equation, one from a table. I'm using a lot of old Regents questions. That's why mine are multiple choice. Yours will not necessarily be. There will be some, but not necessarily all. So an astronaut drops a rock off the edge of a cliff on the moon. The distance, d in meters, the rock travels can be modeled by this function. So I already see that I have that. What is the average speed or average rate of change that it will go between 5 and 10? So those are my x values. So the idea here is I need a coordinate at 5 and a coordinate at 10. So d of 5 is going to be 0.8 times 5 squared. D of 10 is going to be 0.8 times 10 squared, right? Just plugging those in. Now, you can plug those into your calculator. So 0.8 times 5 squared is 20. 80% of 25. And 0.8 times 100, I shouldn't do it in my calculator because I'm a math teacher. It's 80, but it's Monday night. We're checking. So this would be 20, and this would be 80. So now I'm going to actually calculate that rate of change because getting just that is not enough. So change in y, 80 minus 20, over change in x, 10 minus 5. That is 60 over 5, which is 12. Again, send questions as you have them. Next one. The Joey enlarged a 3-inch by 5-inch photograph on a copy machine. He enlarged it 4 times. There shouldn't be a Joe there. Joey's just a person. Or the. The table below shows the area of the photograph after each enlargement. What is the average rate of change of the area from the original photograph, that would be this one, to the 4th enlargement, that would be this one, to the nearest 10th. And especially on a free response, make sure that you're rounding correctly. That's a big source of error for people. So those are my 2 points. Remember, this is our x and that's our y. So I'm going to do 36.6 minus 15 over 4 minus 0. And 36.6 minus 15 is 21.6 over 4. And that would be 5.4. Again, send questions as you have them, okay? All right, let's chat about 1-3, inverses. There were some questions on this, and so this is definitely something that I would study. This is a new topic, right? Not review. So inverses, the big idea that you need to know is that they switch x and y, or they switch your domain and range. But if you keep switch x and y in the back of your mind, everything else is going to wind up making sense, okay? So start with that. So let's look at this first problem, and I'll zoom in a second. There we go. If AB lies on the graph of y equals f of x, then on y equals f inverse, what point must it contain? So remember that that's your x and that's your y. Well, what do inverses do? They switch x and y, so this would be BA. Again, just seeing if you understand the concept of a limit. Or not a limit, sorry, of an inverse. All right, next one. What graph represents the inverse of this function? So I'm going to start by writing the inverse. That's going to help me a little bit. So my inverse here is going to be the set 1, 0, switch your x and y. 4, 1, switch your x and y. 3, 2, switch your x and y. This is what I'm looking for on my inverse. So I'm going to go through first and try to find one that has maybe 4, 1 on it. Just pick a point. This one definitely doesn't have it. This one definitely doesn't have it. 3 looks like it could have it. 4 doesn't. So let's check that the other ones are on 3. There's 4, 1. There's 3, 2. And there's 1, 0. So all those points are on this. So that is the inverse. All right. Last two, we're going to talk about finding an inverse algebraically. So what is the inverse of this? To find an inverse, first thing I would do is write it in terms of x and y. No algebra 2 there yet, right? Now I'm going to switch x and y. X equals -6, y minus 2. And now I just need to solve for y. And there's a bunch of different ways to do this. You can divide by -6 first. You can multiply, all sorts of different things. What most of my students would think to do here is probably distribute out the -6. So I'm going to do that first just because that's what I've seen you guys do in class. So I distributed out my -6. I'm going to subtract the 12 over, and then I'm going to divide. So divide each part by -6, not just one part, right? So that just gives me y, which I'm going to make sure I write as f inverse, because I started with f. X over -6 is -x over 6. -12 over -6 is plus 2. So it would be +2 minus x over 6. All right, next one. What is the inverse of this? F of x equals x cubed minus 2. So I'm going to start by just writing it in terms of x and y. I'm going to switch x and y. And then I'm going to solve for y. Maddie, I see your question. We'll go back to it in a second, okay? X plus 2 equals y cubed. And then to undo cubic, cube root both sides. So here's what that looks like. Cube root this, cube root that. Cube and cube root undo each other. So this side is just y, or I'm going to write it as f inverse. And then this would be the cubed root of x plus 2. So that is answer choice 3. Don't let the plus or minus square scare you. This isn't a square root. So just look at that. Okay, so before we go any further, we had a question back on function inverse or inverse function notation. So I'm going to go back to that. So this person said, how did you get that after 3 hours there were 35 people on the beach? Meaning, where did that come from? So thank you for saying that. I didn't mean to put 3 there. It should have been after t hours. So I think I just said t and wrote 3. Thank you for pointing that out, though. Okay, good. All right. So let's go to regressions. I am actually not going to really review this here because most of you guys are really good with it. If you need help on this, in the description box below this video, I will put a link to a review video on that, okay? But in general, stat, edit to get to the lists, enter in your data, make sure your lists are the same length, and then to get the equation, stat, calc, for linear regression, and then you can get your equation out of there. This whole document will be on my teacher site too, so if you want to see these, you can grab it there, but again, I'll put a video down below if you want to see it. All right, systems in 3 variables. Let's chat about these. So I've got an A, a B, and a C, or an X, a Y, and a Z, or whatever variables they are, and I want all 3, okay? Now, the important thing here to remember is you're really just eliminating. You're going to eliminate one variable, wind up with a good old Algebra 1 system, solve it. So that's really our goal here. So this question says which is not contained in the solution of the system. So we need to get all 3 answers here to see which one of these isn't in there. So I'm going to start by choosing 2 pairs and going from there. I see 2 pairs that jump out to me here because this has a positive 5b and this one has a -5 and that one has a -5. To me, I'm going to do 1 and 2 and eliminate b. And then I'm going to do 1 and 3 and eliminate b. So that's kind of my plan. And the way that I set this up, in my class at least, oops, sorry, I unplugged my laptop. The way that I set this up in my class is I put 3 columns. So the first column is where I do my initial eliminating. My second column is where I do my Algebra 1 work. My third column is where I do my final substitution. So I'm going to use 1 and 2, and then 1 and 3. Those are my pairs. So 1 and 2, I have A plus 5B minus C equals -20. And I have 4A minus 5B plus 4C equals 19. These already eliminate because look right there. You've got 5B and -5B. So I'm going to combine those, add them together. So that's 5A, 0B, plus 3C equals -1. And this in my class, we would either highlight or put a box around because that's one of our Algebra 1 equations that we're going to use. Now I'm going to choose my other pair. Again, it can be any other pair. but to me it makes sense to use 1 and 3 because I already see the b's will eliminate. So I have a plus 5b minus c equals negative 20. And I have negative a minus 5b minus 5c equals 2. And I see something cool that's going to happen here. So I'm going to eliminate these. So these eliminate, that's weird. These eliminate, that's weird. And I'm just wound up with negative 6c equals negative 18. So actually I've saved myself some work here because I get c equals 3. So already I can eliminate answer choice 3. It's not that. Now I'm going to go back and use these two equations to help me. So I know 5a plus 3c equals negative 1. And I know c equals 3. Now, could you do elimination again here? Have at it. Of course you could. But when I see this, substitution would be way easier here. So 5a plus 3c, I know c is 3, equals negative 1. So I would have 5a plus 9 equals negative 1. I would have 5a is negative 10, so a is negative 2. So I am eliminating answer choice 1. That's a solution. So I've got C, I've got A, I just need B. Pick any of the originals, it doesn't matter which one. I'm just going to pick the first one because it's there. So A plus 5B minus C equals negative 20. Well, A we said was negative 2. 5B, I don't know B, I want that. Minus C, so minus 3 equals negative 20. So there I get 5B minus 5 equals negative 20. That gives me 5B equals negative 15, which gives me B equals negative 3. So that is my solution. It is not 4. So answer choice 2 is the only one here that doesn't work. I know that these can be frustrating if you get something wrong, but go back through each step. I have not seen anyone in any of my classes make an actual algebra mistake here. I've seen addition mistakes, I've seen subtraction mistakes, I've seen multiplication mistakes, but I have seen no actual algebra mistakes. So please, if you're stuck on something, go back and look at it, okay? Take the time, you'll be fine. And if you're getting out decimal answers, non-integer answers, then I would double check your work, because on the Regents, I've always seen these come out to be integers. All right. Last thing, function transformations. We're going to review this quickly. So these are your rules. You guys have a summary of these in your notes. But here, we are going horizontal, left or right. Those happen in your parentheses. And they're always the opposite of what you think. So going to the right is going to be a minus. Going to the left is going to be a positive. If it happens in the parentheses, it's always the opposite of what you think. If you're going vertically, you're just adding outside the parentheses. Up is plus, down is minus. Reflection, outside, that's over the x-axis. Inside, that's over the y-axis. And a stretch, if it's out front, those are vertical stretches and compressions. If it's inside, those are horizontal stretches and compressions. And again, you've got good notes on this, but this is just a quick review of some problems. So let's just talk about what happens here. So if I look at this, this is taking my parent function, f of x, and adding 2 to it. This is happening outside the parentheses. So this would be a vertical translation up 2, right? Or of positive 2. So up 2. All right, let's look at 2. I've got 3 times f of x. Well, that's happening outside the parentheses, so that is going to be a vertical stretch. So this is a vertical stretch. If it happens outside the parentheses, it's exactly what you think it should be. So by a factor of 3. If it's inside, that's when we talk about opposites. F f of negative x, this is inside the parentheses, which means it's a horizontal change of some type. So this is a reflection horizontally, which would be over the y-axis, over the y-axis. F of x minus 2, well, this happens inside the parentheses. That means it's horizontal. It also means that it's the opposite of what you think it should be. So if it's minus 2, this is a horizontal translation, and it's going to the right 2. So if it's inside, to the right 2. Okay. Let's do one more of these, and then we're going to write some equations. So one more of these, f of x equals 3x. So this is inside, which means it's a horizontal change. It's either a horizontal stretch or compression. So this is a horizontal. Now 3 makes you think it should stretch, so that actually means it's going to compress. Horizontal compression by a factor of 1/3. So it's compressing to be 1/3 as that. Okay, last thing, and then I'll take any questions from you guys that you have. So given the parent function, write the equation of it. Okay, so we have an absolute value function. Remember, that's your parent function. Vertical shift up 5, horizontal shift right 3. So up 5 is going to be f of x plus 5. It's going to happen outside your parentheses. Horizontal shift right 3, that's going to be f of x minus 3. It's in the parentheses, and so it should go the opposite direction. So here's what I'm going to have. F of x equals, or actually, I'm going to call this something else because f is our original. So I'm just going to say y equals absolute value of x minus 3 plus 5. So the minus 3 moves it to the right, the plus 5 moves it up. All right, next part, a vertical compression by 2/5. Vertical means it's going to be outside your parentheses. There's our parent function, the radical. So this is going to be y equals 2/5 radical x. Cubic, there's your parent function. Reflected over the x-axis, so that's a vertical flip. So this is going to be negative f of x. And down 2, that's f of x minus 2. So this would be negative x cubed minus 2. Last one, quadratic, x squared, right? Vertical compression by 0.45, so that's going to be 0.45 f of x. It's vertical, so it's outside. Horizontal shift left 8, so that's going to be f of x plus 8 because it's horizontal, it's inside your parentheses. So this is going to be y equals x plus 8 squared, so modifying inside your parentheses. And then, I'm just giving myself a little more space, you need that 0.45 out front. All right, that's all I got, guys. It's a 40-minute test, so it shouldn't be too terribly much to review. Send me questions. I'm going to hang out for a couple minutes, and then we'll log off for the night. But thank you for watching. If you watch this on rewatch, that's great. You can speed it up, slow it down. But please let me know any questions you still have. Yeah, Caroline, we are doing this tomorrow, so don't sweat it that you haven't seen this yet. Any other questions? Final countdown. All right, guys. Well, I hope you have an awesome night. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll do this again before the next test. Have a great one.